There are so many cool games right now like Draw Steel or Daggerheart. And then we have, games you may be playing and very familiar with like D&D. And a thing to ask yourself is, well, how complex are some of these new games? A game like Draw Steel or Daggerheart with its power cards, it may feel like there's a lot to track. So are these games really much more complex than D&D? Are they even more complex? How do they really compare even to super simple games? That's what we're going to look at today. I started thinking about this video because I was working with Draw Steel, where you get a ton of character abilities, these sort of powers that you can use. And previously I had thought about this with Daggerheart, where I would look through the book and make my character and start thinking about, okay, I've got my Ancestry card and I've got a, power that I get to use. And as I did that, it all felt kind of complicated, right? It felt like I was doing a lot with my character. And in examining that design, which I can't help but do as a designer, I had to think, well, how does that even compare to D&D or to each other? Because some things don't feel like they are a lot to track, but they are a thing you kind of have to look up during play. And it means that when initiative is rolled and everybody's trying to play and you're trying to stay in the moment and role play and have fun, exciting events, you might suddenly be staring at your character sheet or your cards and trying to figure out how to do things. Though I thought back on my high-level bard that I played at the Winter Fantasy Convention this year with D&D 2024, and I had just constant bonus actions to use and things like that. So, all right, the only solution was to go into a spreadsheet and start comparing all of these things. But before I dig into these three games, which is what I'm really going to do, I'm going to compare characters. All right, let me just tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to compare a wizard and a fighter in D&D, Daggerheart, and Draw Steel at level 3, because that's where you get your subclass in D&D, and so it's a decent look at complexity. Now, of course, we could do this through all the levels, and we could do lots of different classes and which subclasses we use. There are a lot of ways to influence this, but I just wanted to look at this at a fairly simple, I think you'll hopefully agree, stable way of looking at it, reasonable, fair way to look at it, and just see how this complexity works and what we can learn about it. You may have heard us on Mastering Dungeons, my friend Sean and I, talking about the issue of latency just a couple episodes ago. And that's an important factor that I want to get to as well. But I first want to start by looking at kind of setting a baseline of what we might all agree are pretty simple games, right? So to do that, I wanted to look at Pirate Borg and I wanted to look at Shadowdark. And these really kind of help set a baseline for how simple can a game get. And with Shadowdark, it's pretty simple. A goblin can't be surprised. That's a pretty minor thing to track, but it's still something you've got to put on your character sheet and you've got to remember, wait, I can't be surprised, and say that, right? Or I'm a halfling. Once per day, I can become invisible for 3 rounds. That is a thing I've got to remember to do and think about and use at the right moments, right? So when I looked at that, okay, I said generally across these different types, that is like a thing. Usually you have one thing from your character, from your ancestry that you kind of need to write down in your character sheet, not forget, keep track of. And then I looked at the classes because in Shadowdark, we don't have to worry about a background or really the effects of tons of gear. We don't have weapon masteries. We don't have power cards, things like that. Look at the class. It's pretty simple, right? So the fighter, they have knowledge of weapons, they have armor, they have hit points, but none of that you don't track that. You do it and you're done, and that's your value, and you just did rolling attack rolls and seeing if you got hit, but you don't have to really worry about it. Or even Holler, which is an ability. Add your Constitution modifier positive to your gear slots. This becomes a number, right? You have X gear slots, this modified that number, but it's not a thing you have to worry about. The one you do have to worry about is Grit. You choose Strength or Dex, and from now on, when you have some sort of opposed force you're opposing, you're trying to get out of shackles, rusty chains with dexterity, or you're trying to kick down a stark door or push another person with either Strength or Dex, now you've got to make an opposed check. So this is the thing that I have to write on my character sheet and I have to track during play. I mean, it's not bad. When I say have to, I don't mean that's like, oh no, I got to track this. It's fun. It's a fun thing that I get to do. And it is a thing. So this is a thing I've got to remember from my fighter class. And we're done. That's all this Shadowdark Fighter has, is one thing that I have to kind of think about and track, and will enjoy doing so. Then when I gain levels, I get to roll on a table. And all the things on this table are passive. They're things like a bonus to your attacks. It's not circumstantial, it's just done. So as I level, my complexity will not go up. So I get one thing for my ancestry in Shadowdark, I get one thing for being a fighter, and it doesn't even change as I level, right? I'd have to get like magic items or something to make it more complicated. That's really wild, right? So that's a complexity that's just super, super low, right? A complexity of 2 for our fighter, and it just goes that way until the end of time. Okay, let's look at our wizard. Our wizard is a little more complicated in Shadowdark. So I think the easiest thing to do is to track across these systems the number of spells you know. Because knowing a spell is sort of like having one of these, Daggerheart cards or an ability in Draw Steel. It's a thing you might use. And that's sort of the complexity or the brain space it eats up. It's less important that you can do it twice, and more that you, like the number of slots, and more that you have to constantly think between these things. You probably won't, in a lot of these games, you won't run out of the ability to do a thing. So it's more about which thing. It's not entirely true at all levels in all games, but it's close enough that I felt that using spells known was better than using slots, if that makes sense. But with Shadowdark, it makes a lot of sense because you have a number of spells that you know. In fact, you know 3 at first level. Each time you go gonna level, you're going to get to know 1 more. It changes at some levels, but for the first 3 levels, it's all like that. Other than that, everything else here is like, rule for learning spells. When you find it on a scroll, that's only going to happen every now and then. So I'm not going to worry about that. So our number for our, 1 for our ancestry, assuming that, we're a dwarf and we got to track what our dwarfiness does. We then have 3 spells to track. And then we have when we level up, so it's a total of 4. When we level up, we will be getting a spell, right? And then we will be rolling on our talents table to see what random feature we get. And of these, 2 of them are things that you might track. One is getting another spell. One is getting advantage on casting a particular spell, So we can see that at the most simple level, Shadowdark, even for the wizard, has a total of 4 at first level, a total of 2 or 5 at second level. And you get to level 3, you might have 7, right? Maybe by then you've rolled one of these that requires tracking. So let's say around 7. So 2 and 7 are sort of your level 3 mounts, which is really, really low complexity. Now, Pirate Borg is kind of similar. In my Pirate Borg game, I am playing a swashbuckler, and you can see this double-page spread in this small book. This is the entirety of the rules. It's very similar to Shadowdark in being very small. So one is really just a pretty picture on one side, and then there's just one small page with the rules. And what I get is a list to roll on for out of 6 possible things that I get to do at first level. I will get one of these. It's my fighting style. Pretty defining, roll randomly, figure that out, that's who I am. And then every time I level, I'm going to get to roll on a different table and choose one of those things. And you re-roll. So you really, at 6 levels, you're done with all the things. But it means that it's level 1, I get one thing. There aren't ancestries or backgrounds or things like that. There are some things to track around gear, like this is a weapon that requires reloading, or this is armor that has a DR test that I do to see whether I reduce the damage coming in. So I'd say that gear adds 1 to 2 things. You get 1 for your class. So we could say that Pirate Borg is maybe 1 to 3 things that you are tracking at level 1, as compared to 2 things for the fighter in Shadowdark, 4 for the wizard. And as we level up, we're going to get 1 more thing. So at level 2, we have 2 to 4. So the complexity is actually quite similar to Shadowdark, close enough to round it to being around the same thing. Other than the fighter. I mean, the fighter in Shadowdark, 2 for the end of time is wild, right? And you can see how that, you may love a simple game or you may love a complex game. And this will matter because doing just those two things as a fighter till the end of time may be awesome. And you focus on the gameplay and you're coming up with cool ideas and you're role playing, and that could be great. Or it could be, boy, I wish my class did more, right? It just depends on the player and the group. The group will maybe want, well, you're the fighter, go up there and hit it again, or, protect our torch or anything like that, right? That could be awesome, or it could be a little underwhelming. It'll depend on your style. Similarly, the highly complex games, that complexity may be a real hindrance to you, or it may be a huge advantage that totally gets you excited about the game. So I'm not saying in anything in this video, game A is B or game B is great. I just want to compare that complexity. And here with these low complex games, we have set a baseline, right? We have said Pirate Borg, Shadowdark, it can be as simple as 2. It can be, 4, something like that. That's what a simple game is like. Cool. So now let's look at a game like D&D. So as I go through each of these games, I'm going to use a similar approach to what I just talked about with those other games. I kind of want to track things that are not passive, right? If you give me a +1 to my attack bonus, always, I don't need to worry about that. It's not a thing that increases my complexity. It was just a build sort of option, but it didn't impact me. It doesn't impact my gameplay. Now, if you say I get a +1 to attack undead or +1 to attack things that are prone, that is a thing I must remember. It's got to be somewhere on my character sheet. I've got to remember to use it when it shows up. It's a thing that increases the complexity of play, right? Other things might make the game sort of more complex, but if in the background, I just need to understand the rules and I'm done, right? If you tell me that I have a certain number of armor slots, that is a thing I learned to play Daggerheart. And when you give me one more, it's just a thing that's on my sheet, doesn't really increase my complexity. But get a armor slot back when this particular thing happens, that's a thing that's complex, right? I'm going to go with spells, and I'm going to say that spells are the number of spells known, because that's like these ability cards, right? I might not use a particular draw steel card in a combat, but I must know what they all do in order to play effectively. With Daggerheart, I've got to know what all of these different power cards do, or I'm not playing my character correctly, even though I may only use a single one in a combat, right? You have to know what abilities you have. And so with spellcasters, it's really about the fact that you've got to know all these different spells, say in D&D, to track them, and that's how I'm going to measure that. All right, so let's take a look at the D&D Fighter. And the Fighter is a interesting class because you might think of it as being a super simple thing to do. And it has some simplicity compared to the Wizard, as we'll see. But let me start by talking about the core we must first look at, which is your species or ancestry, right? In D&D, your species will have something to track, and it's going to vary a bit by species. So an Aasimar has 4 things to track by this kind of way of looking at it, things that I need to write down and may come into play. And one more thing that'll come at 3rd as a spell comes online. A Dragonborn has 3 things. Just to give you an example of what these things are like, I have my breath weapon, I have damage resistance to a particular type, and I have dark vision. Dark vision's a little arguable, but it's still a thing I've got to remember to do in a particular case, so I'm going to count it. And this may not be a perfect measure. Again, I'm not going for exact numbers of science. I'm doing a comparison here that's relative. I came up with a 4 a lot. Dwarf has 4, gnome has 4, elves have 3 to 4, and then 1 at 3rd, right? So 4 was a pretty common number. So with D&D, even before I get to look at my fighter, I've got to have 4 for my species. Then my culture and background, right? So my background is going to give me a feat. That is important. Things like skills and tools and equipment, I'm not going to worry about that. But my feat is usually something that I'll need to track. Not always true, but enough so that I'm going to count it as one thing to track here. So I'm up to 5 before I even get to my class. All right, so now let's look at this class. What do I need to track as I go through and look at my character, right? This doesn't matter. My hit point die, yeah, that might be a thing to track, because you can spend them in certain situations. When you rest, you need to worry about it. So yeah, I'm going to say that I'm going to count my hit point die. Barely, but I'm going to count that hit point die as something to check. I'm not going to worry about these other things, skills, saving throws, skill you'll probably use regardless. Knowing that you have it is helpful, might influence it, but it's not an enormous thing. I'm going to choose not to count skills, though you could make an argument for that. I'm going to go with not tracking them. Similarly, weapon proficiencies, you're going to have the things you want. It's not going to take up much time to look at that. And your equipment will generally not matter, though it does matter that we need some basic way to figure out attacks, so we'll get to that. So now let's get into what it means to be a level 1 fighter, and we're going to go to this table and see fighting style, second wind, and weapon mastery. Now, fighting style, if we go and we look at chapter 5, we're going to see that a lot of these are actually static. There are a few, like blind sight, that might be, that matters. Okay, I'm in darkness, I remember this. What's the range? It's 10 feet. So some of them are like that, but the vast majority of these, interception is active for sure, but a lot of them are just a thing that you're going to write down. I think it's close enough to most of these being passive that I'm going to count this as passive, though, again, it differs on the particular character. Also, the recommendation for defense as the default is one that is passive. It's just a bonus to your armor class. So that is nothing there. That's a 0, nothing to track there. Second win is definitely something you do track, right? You're going to spend a bonus action, regain that D10 hit points. You've got to track this and think about it. You can do it twice. You can regain it on a short rest. And a thing I'm not going to look at in this video is whether something is a super complicated thing or a simple thing. They're both things you've got to track, right? So I'm just going to say second win counts as one thing I must track because I just have to remember how that feature works and use it when I need it. My weapon mastery is going to be similar in that I'm going to have 3 kinds of weapons, and they're going to have these mastery property, 3 types of weapon mastery properties. And I'm going to have to track what they do. Does it knock prone? Does it allow a save? Does it, it's going to be a thing to track. And arguably it could be more than one because I have 3 weapon masteries. So if I have, Vex and all these, I got to track them all realistically, but maybe one of them is simple. So I'm going to call it 2. Maybe I'm being a little lenient there, but I'm going to say so far we've got our hit point die, we've got our second win, and 2 of these 3 weapon masteries probably need to be tracked. So our class is adding 4 things. Our ancestry had 4, and our culture had 1. So we are at 5 so far, but I've got to do something else. Realistically, my character sheet needs to have this weapon to be tracked, melee and ranged. And those are usually 2 things that I'm going to add. Now, I could say Shadowdark, Pirate Borg. Realistically, I should go back and add 1 more to their columns as well, because there's going to be something there that I track, if not 2 things. So fair is fair. Let's say, and the reason to do this that's important is because when we get to Daggerheart or Draw Steel, you will have abilities instead of these types of basic attacks. So it matters to kind of track them fairly because you're tracking them in that case of that game. So here we end up with level 11 being 4 from Ancestry, 1 from your culture or background, 4 from your class, so that's 9 right there, and then 2 from the 2, 1 melee and 1 ranged weapons. That's a total of 11 things to track compared to, let's say, if we add even 2 weapons to the fighter for Shadowdark, we've got 4, right? So 11 versus 4, comparing D&D 2024 to Shadowdark. And Pirate Borgs, we'd have, Shadowdark, if we go to Pirate Borg, we would have about 1 to 3 things at level 1. If we add a weapon or 2, it's still, 3 to 5 compared to 11, right? So we can see that difference in complexity is fairly significant. What happens when we level? So when we level our fighter, our D&D fighter, we're going to get Action Surge. We're going to get Tactical Mind. Action Surge is definitely something we're going to track and think about when to use. Tactical Mind, we can look at here. This is going to be that when we fail an ability check, we can expend a use of our second wind to push ourselves to succeed. And instead of regaining those hit points, we are going to roll a d10 and add that to the ability check. Definitely a thing to track and look at. When we get to level 3, and so I should say that's 2 things we're adding at level 2. So when we get to level 3, we're going to choose a subclass, right? We have the following standard ones, and I know there are other books out there, and there's 2014 as well. But we're going to stick to the default in the player's handbook, which also puts us on parity with the core books of these other games that don't have a ton of supplements out yet. And we're going to say, okay, fighter subclass. It's going to be one of these 4. And that is where we have to then go and look at like, well, what does it mean to be battle master? So you're going to get combat superiority and these maneuvers. And that might sound super complicated. And it's actually not too terrible. But it'll depend. Let's go through it. So battle master, you're going to get 3 maneuvers. And you have to know what those do. So that's 3 things to track. You also have the mechanic of the superiority die itself. I think that's a thing that's complicated enough that you're going to track it as a thing. It's a pool. It's an extra resource. So I'd say that 4 things for the battle master. Let's look at the champion, which is often thought of as the simple choice. Well, the champion gets 1 improved critical, which is a thing you have to look at because you've got to remember that range and know what to do with it. Not a big deal, but it is something. And then you have remarkable athlete that actually has 2 different uses to it. So if we look at our champion here, we have, we talked about the improved critical. Remarkable athlete has advantage on initiative rolls and strength athletics checks. And when you score a critical hit, you can move half your speed. Those are definitely at least 2 things, arguably could even be 3 things to track. So that means that our champion is at least 3 things. Our battleman master is 4 things. Our Eldritch Knight gets 2 cantrips. That's 2 things to track. 2 level 1 spells, so that's 4 things. Warbond probably doesn't add much, so I'm going to call it 4. Psi Warrior, you get your Psi Energy dice to track. You get 3 psionic powers like Protective Field, Sonic Strike, Telekinetic Movement. So those are 3 things. Total of 4 things to track. So fighter, we could say that generally you're going to get 4 things to track. So what's that mean in terms of totals? It means level 1 fighter has 11 things, level 2 has 13, and level 3 has 17 things to track. That might surprise you, right? That might be a lot more than you think a fighter has to deal with. And if you think of a new player, yeah, that's significant, right? I mean, our level 3 total for the fighter in Shadowdark is 2 things plus whatever you want to call it for weapons. So maybe 4 compared to 17, right? That's significantly more complicated. And the reason for that is D&D is trying to make it really awesome to play this fighter, that you feel like there are lots of neat things for you to do, right? That's the goal. All right, so what about wizards? So with wizards, we're going to start with the same background, right? You're going to have same basics of your species is going to be probably 4 things. Your background will probably provide you 1 thing to track. And now we get to the class. Your class, in addition to having some really cool artwork, is going to have your hit die to track. And then it's going to get into the features for the level 1 wizard. First thing that's going to be right there is spells. You're going to get 3 cantrips. You're going to get 2 spell slots. But I think that, again, it's really about those 4 prepared spells. Even though I have 2 slots, both times I'm working through 4 things that I can do. And I've got my cantrips that I'm tracking. I may or may not run out of spell slots, but probably in a low-level adventure, I probably won't, or I'll be careful and I'll be mitigating it. And so the majority of the adventure, really what's happening is I'm considering those 4 prepared spell choices, right? So the number of spells that I prepared or know. In this case, it's these prepared spells I care about. So I'm going to argue that that's 4 things. You also have Ritual Adept, which you do not need to really worry about. It just says that you get to cast rituals. There's some things about the spell book, but again, that's just generally not going to come up in play. You don't need to really worry about it. And then really the only other thing that's going to happen is going to be your arcane recovery. And that does sort of matter because I've got to realize that, well, if I take a short rest, I will get some of my spell slots back. And that will impact how I play my character during combats. So I think it is a thing to track that I have or haven't used that with my wizard. So overall, my wizard has 7 things from the class versus 4 for the fighter. And I have those 5 things that I was tracking before. So my total is 12. I probably have I still probably have a melee and a ranged weapon. I know I won't use them very often, but if I count those, I end up at a total of 14 things to do. And I think that's a reasonably fair number. Now, what happens as I level up? At level 2, I'm going to get Scholar, which is going to give me expertise in something. I don't think that matters at all. That's just going to be my skills, and so I'm going to say that that doesn't count for much. But what I am getting is progression on that spell table we saw before, and that's going to be an extra prepared slot. So I actually I have less than the fighter. I only go up by 1, so I'm a total of 15 at level 1 versus 13 for the fighter. And at level 3, I'm going to get a bunch of different things that I'm going to get. I'm getting my wizard's subclass. That's going to, at a baseline, give me spells. So actually, my number of known spells will increase by 3. And then I get to choose my wizard subclass. Abjurer is going to, give you some things like Abjuration, Savant, Extra Effect. All of these have a thing that's themed by the types of spells where scribing spells is impacted and so on. Doesn't change anything, so I'm not going to worry about that. Really what it's going to be is each of these subclasses give you one ability. And so if I look at, say, the Abjurer, you'll see this kind of thing. I get, to add some things to the list of spells, to my spell book. And one of them can be free. But it doesn't actually change the number of prepared spells, so I don't think it impacts things. But what we do have is that second feature, which is Arcane Ward. Here, there is a thing we must track. Sometimes it's quite complicated, as you can see in all this text about the Arcane Ward. But I'm going to say that the Arcane Ward in this case has 2 specific benefits that you're really getting because of this additional piece around the spell slot. So there are 2 things to track here. If I look at the Diviner, my Portent is going to be a thing to track, even though I can do it more than once. Evoker gives me Potent Cantrip, and Illusionist gives me Improved Illusion, which has 2 things to track. So the usual is about 1.5, and of course you have your spells. So at level 3, I'm getting 4.5. So my level 3 total is 19.5, which compared to the Fighter for 5th edition, it's 17 versus 19.5. So that is pretty interesting, right? So when I look at D&D, here's where we are currently, right? We've got a level 1 at 11 for Fighter, 14 for Wizard, and it goes to 13 and 15 at level 2, 17 at 20 at level 3. So if we add in and compare against D&D, Shadowdark's Fighter and Wizard and Pirate Borg, which it has spellcasters, but they're basically like the other classes, or close enough. And we look at these ancestries, backgrounds, weapons, what you get at class 1. And even if we assume that all of these games have one ranged and one melee weapon you're going to need to track, and we just add that in for fairness, we're looking at 11 and 14 things to do at level 1 for D&D. And we're looking at 4 and 6 for Shadowdark and 4 for Pirate Borg. So a significant increase in complexity, right? Even if we double the wizard's complexity for Shadowdark, we don't get to what D&D has, right? So it's a significant difference. As the levels go up, we still see that there is a fair amount of complexity on the D&D side, right? 13 and 15 compared to 4 and 7 and 5, 17 and 20 compared to 4 and 9 and 6. So it is a substantial difference. Now, there will be levels above level 3 where D&D will again get jumps in complexity, right? Sometimes a particular class or subclass adds a number of things at a given level. But for purposes of me having other things in the day that I need to do, I'm just going to stop at level 3 here. And if someone else wants to take up this mantle, please do. But yeah, so this is pretty interesting. And now I really want to dig into these other really cool games, Daggerheart and Draw Steel. So for Daggerheart, we're going to use a similar approach to how we look at the classes in this game. And there are some really neat options. A lot of times there are cards that are used, but the cards don't really change the complexity. They just sort of package it. When we go to character creation, we're going to go through the steps. We're going to start with our class. The class will immediately have a subclass to it. So that's sort of baked into the initial design where we say, okay, I want to, be a troubadour, or in this case, if we want to go more towards fighter and wizard, we're going to say, I'm going to be a warrior. And I'm going to choose whether I'm Call of the Brave or Call of the Slayer. And I'm going to be a wizard for School of Knowledge or School of War. And as we go to a particular class, we'll see that there are some things that we begin with that are features. Every class has a hope feature where you can spend 3 hope and get a benefit. So this is a thing that you can see we are going to track because we're going to spend 3 hope to gain a +1 bonus to attack roll until our next rest. We've got to choose when to activate that. We've got to keep this in mind. So having no mercy written on our character sheet is going to matter. And then the class features are going to drive what we can do as well. But we've got to start with, in addition to our class, we're going to have our ancestry and our background and our culture. All of these things have different benefits. The ancestry is going to, vary a bit from particular, from one to the other, whether we're a Clank or we're a Dracona, right? They're going to have features. And generally, when we're looking at these kinds of features that are in the game, there are usually 2 things to track, right? We are tracking that we can choose one of our experiences and we get a +1. That is pretty passive. But here, efficient, when you take a short rest, you can choose a long rest move instead of a short rest move. It's not a battle feature, but it's still something to track. The Dracona, your scales act as natural protection. When you would take severe damage, you can mark a stress to mark 1 fewer hit point. Definitely got to track that. Elemental breath, we choose an element for our breath, and we deal D8 magic damage in the very close range. So that is for sure 2 things we're tracking. And when I looked enough at enough of these to say, probably our Daggerheart Warrior, the ancestry is going to have 2 things that drive it, and same thing for our wizard. And then we get to look at our community. After you get through all of these ancestries, you choose your community. The communities that represent the culture or environment you came from, those are going to usually have one thing that you have to track and pay attention to. An example of something is well-read. You have advantage on rolls that involve the history, culture, or politics of a prominent person or place. But they can be things that come up during combat. 3 things or sayings or values that represent the upbringing that you went through. And when you think you embody those, you can roll a d20 as your hope die right there. So that could happen during combat. Now, your background will likely not have anything that you need to track, but your experiences that come as part of this process, those are going to be 2 things that you track because they are not like skills. I mean, they are and aren't like skills, but they aren't solely like skills, and that they aren't just applied when someone calls for that skill check or even that attribute check. They're things that you argue based on the situation that applies your background of your character, your backstory. So it's definitely a thing you need to track. Think about when you could do it. It could happen in combat. It can happen during discussions with another NPC. It can be all kinds of situations. Another thing that we need to worry about across all classes is your armor slot. That is a thing, the fact that you have a number of them, and when you're getting attacked, you have to decide when and if to use an armor slot to reduce your damage. That is a thing to track. Similarly, you're going to have hope, and your hope is a thing to track. Specific to our warrior, we've got that 3 hope feature, No Mercy, that we talked about. We get a feature that is an attack of opportunity benefit that applies specific rules. And we've got combat training, which gives us bonus physical damage. So overall, we're going to have several things there. And then we're going to have our subclass foundation features. And that's going to give us 2 things for what's called, if we go with this option, Call of the Brave. So if I choose Call of the Brave that you see here on the top right, that's going to give me 2 things to track. Sometimes that could be 3 things depending what I choose, but here I'm going a little bit with default. You're also going to get domain cards. So you're going to get, a power card sort of like this, a domain card. And that is going to be something that you absolutely have to track. And in fact, they can be quite complex, right? So forest sprites is make a spellcraft roll, spend any number of hope to create an equal number of small forest sprites who appear at points you choose. So this was, you spent hope, you get that many forest sprites, and you put them down within far range. Your allies get a +3 bonus to attack rolls against adversaries within melee range of a sprite. An ally who marks an armor slot while within melee range of a sprite can mark an additional armor slot. Normally they can only do 1. A sprite vanishes after granting a benefit or taking any damage. That's a lot to track for this feature, right? That many little things around the battlefield, next to this, not next to that, right? It's a fair bit. So, and some others are much simpler, right? But that gives you an idea of what it can be like in terms of those domain cards. So what does that mean when we take our armor slot, our hope, our warrior feature, our class 1 features, our subclass features, our domain cards? That adds up to 9 things that we're going to track there. We're also going to track a primary weapon and a secondary weapon, which the game uses. And for all that feels like a lot, and we may spend a lot of time thinking about it and choosing it, I certainly did with my Daggerheart characters. The truth is, at the end of the day, it's kind of the weapon you have, and it's just like in D&D, you're just tracking this one weapon that you're going to use. So that's 2 things from that. So what is our total from all of these things, our ancestries, all of this put together? Well, it actually totals 16 things for our fighter at level 1, which is pretty impressive, right? It is actually a little bit higher than I thought it was, and that compares to the 11 that we had in D&D with the fighter. So it's a significant increase in complexity. Now, when we level up, we will get to choose what we level. But interestingly enough, a lot of it isn't a ton to track. We're going to get an experience. Again, those can be in combat and so on. So it's not just like a skill. So that is a thing to track. And we're going to get a domain card. So that both those things for sure matter. That's 2 things that we're going to track. But beyond our domain card and our experience, we're going to make a decision and that's for level 2 because we reached a new a tier, particularly. We are now going to make a choice of what to advance, and there's this handy chart here. So in addition to our experience, we get an additional experience. We get +2. We gain a +1 bonus to our proficiency. We don't have to track that. And then we're going to choose an option here, like a +1 bonus to evasion or a stress slot or anything like that. This doesn't impact anything. So it's really the domain card and the experience that matter at each of these levels. When we get to level 5, there will be some more meaty things to track. But level 3 is no different than level 2. And so really each time that we level, or when we level at level 2, because it's a new tier, we get that experience. That's 2 things. But at level 3, we're just going to get the 1 domain card, right? So actually surprising to see in Daggerheart that it's really kind of more complex up front, but then less complex over time. So what happens when we add this all together? Well, it really means at level 1, our warrior for Daggerheart has 16 things to track. Our wizard for Daggerheart has 15. It's actually fewer. Why does that happen? Well, it just so happens that for the wizard, we have a thing like prestidigitation, which is non-combat oriented, and then we have a thing called strange patterns that is combat oriented and is a thing that you really have to track. So I would argue we're generally not having to worry too much about prestidigitation, so it's 1 less. So even though we have a similar number of features per class, for the wizard, it just happens to be that one of them you're probably not going to use in situations where you really got to worry about everything that's on your sheet. So it's 1 lower. And it also shows, and this speaks to both Daggerheart and Draw Steel, the approaches are pretty much to try to be similar across the classes and not make one class wildly more complex. Versus in D&D, I think it's a design feature that they often try to create simpler classes that you can choose when you don't want to be the kind of player that tracks a lot, and then ones that are more complicated, which tend to be spellcasters. So let's talk about Draw Steel now and see how that compares to these other 2 systems. We're going to use a similar approach. We're going to go through this process to make a hero, step by step, looking at the process that's outlined here. That's going to involve, again, choosing things like, okay, what type of creature will we have? What type of ancestry are we? There will be a signature trait, which sometimes is a thing to track, often is not. And there will be an ancestry trait to track. So for example, if we are playing a devil, once we get past the cool fiction and everything, we will get to the traits. And we have a signature trait. The devil has silver tongue, which gives you an edge on interpersonal skills and tests. And then you get to purchase traits, which is a little different. So you decide what your particular devil is like. Do you have a barbed tail? Do you have beast legs, glowing eyes, hell sight, impressive horns, prehensile tail, wings? And those things cost 2 or 1 point. So you have 3 points to spend. And what I generally did was look at the quick build, right? Which is beast legs and impressive horns. And that drives, here for impressive horns, something to track about a saving throw that you have to do. And then you're going to look at your beast legs, which gives you a speed, and that's a passive piece. So it'll really depend on the particular type of creature you are and the features that you purchase, because you get to be, this particular dragon, not, like all the others, so which is kind of neat. So all of these will have special differences in how you compare them. But overall, what I figure is you probably have 2 to 3 things to track, right? If you're a human, you can detect supernatural things. You have 3 ancestry points, and by default, you're going to have, some of those be a feature. So let's say 3 things here to track. Then next, we're going to go with our culture. Our background and our culture will involve kind of a neat build. And you can see on Mastering Dungeons podcast, we break this all down. But you're going to make these choices about the type of community that you came from, what kind of culture you're part of, and define it. And these are going to give you some skills to choose from. They're going to give you an edge to tests regarding your culture. That's not a significant thing to track. We're going to then go and look at our career that you're going to get based on your choice of what you've done in the past. This is going to give you skills, languages. It might give you renown, wealth, project points, and a perk. And the perk is definitely a thing to track. So, for example, friend catapult. You can push an ally or object. Most are non-combat, or at least not attacks, but they can still be a thing that matters and that's important to track. So of all these things, culture, career, perk, really there's about one thing that you have to track. So you're going to get actually 2 stated abilities, a free strike for melee and one for ranged. And this gives you like a default codified approach to it. It's basically your attack block, but it's in the draw steel way of doing things. Again, on Mastering Dungeons podcast, we break down exactly how this works, but it's the equivalent of like a power card, very simple, or of your basic attack that you have for your weapon that you would write down in any of these other games. It just has a particular format to it. And what this free strike does is when you don't use some other ability, or when something triggers an attack, you'll probably use your free strike, which keeps the benefits of that action confined, right? So like an ability you have might say, all of your allies get to make a free strike. And this keeps it from being, your most awesome ability ever. So you have this default, if nothing else applies, you use this default sort of lower basic ability. And that's what this is. It's kind of your standard attack. So you will have a melee and a ranged one to track. And that becomes important to do. Now, when we get to actually our class, there are a number of options that could be our warrior. There is a paladin type. There is a monk type. The tactician is definitely a warrior, but it's very tactical. Here I went with our fury, which is sort of our barbarian, but also a warrior as well. And the fury is a lot of fun. So when you start working off of your fury, you will have what is actually a subclass. But the subclass will not just give you a package, but rather drive choices. So as you are leveling up, you will say, okay, what is your path? And if you're going to go with Berserker versus Reaver versus Stormwright, you'll see each of these choices that you make. You have particular choices available to you based on that subclass that you chose. So if you choose the path of the Berserker, then you're going to get the Lines of Force triggered action. When you get your level 1 aspect features, it'll be your kit and primordial strength, right? So that differs by the type of class you have. So the subclass per se isn't a thing to track, but it will drive these choices. And the choices tend to be in these buckets that apply regardless of subclass, if that makes sense. For sure, just as with Daggerheart, we have to track hope. Here we have to track our heroic resource, which is one thing to track. The Fury has a thing called ferocity. Every class has a thing they track, your heroic resource, ferocity for the Fury. Then we have our class abilities, for example, that primordial cunning for the Fury. And then we have a triggered class ability, which is for the Fury Unearthly Reflexes, could be an example. And then we have a second ability that your class gets, which for the Fury might be Mighty Leaps. And again, we're going to go through the book and we're going to make these choices. Like I want Furious Anger. Sometimes I have a choice, sometimes I just get it. But you know, my signature ability, I can choose one of these: Brutal Slam or Hit and Run or Impaled or To the Death. And so I'll go through these choices and say the Fury goes with To the Death. Your entrails are your extrails, and blood for blood. Those might be my signature, my cost 3, and my cost 5 ability. All of this adds up to 9 things to track, right? That I'm getting through all of these different pieces. How does that compare for the Wizard? Well, the Elementalist is pretty similar. When you go to the Elementalist, you're going to have a similar approach where you go through and look at the specialization you take. So whether you're Void, Water, Rot, Fire. Some are coming in later expansions. I'm going to use Fire for these examples. It's pretty simple. And I do have a thing to track here for being an Acolyte of Fire, because I get a +1 when I have the Fire and Magic keywords in an ability. And then similarly to before, we're going to go through and based on the particular type we are, we're going to get different choices to make. So I'm going to have as before, I got to worry about my free strikes. I have that one thing to track for my subclass, which wasn't a thing I need to worry as a fighter. Then I'm going to have my heroic resource. In this case, it's Essence for the Elementalist. Then I'm going to get my class ability, Hurl Element, my specialization feature, such as Return to Formlessness for Fire subclass. Then I get to choose my triggered ability. This is going to be Explosive Assistance for the Fire subclass. And the second ability that my class will get will be Practical Magic, which has something to track. I get an enchantment, which usually you don't have to worry about, and a ward, which is a thing to track. So it's a little more complicated for the Wizard in that case, or the Elementalist. And then as before, we're going to have, as we go through our book, we're going to have the choices that we get. So these are the enchantments, wards, and abilities. And then we're going to have the same kind of idea of you get to choose your level 3 essence cost and your level 5 essence cost. And so there, I'm going to go with bifurcated incineration, the flesh, a crucible, and conflagration. All of these fire-themed powers are going to be one thing to track each. So whereas my warrior had 9 class things to track, here I have 12. Okay, pretty cool. Now, I do need to think about one extra thing when it comes to weapons. We have talked about the free strikes. Some classes have a kit, and these tend to be weapon and armor users, and so it's a nice bundle package approach to what it's like to wear the kind of armor you have. And this often comes with a signature ability for your kit, one neat power that you get to do to represent that kit. So for the warrior, that's going to be a thing that I get, one thing to track. But for the Elementalist, there is no kit, so I don't have to worry about that thing at all. So what does it mean to level? It's going to vary by class, but it's generally relatively similar. One thing that will happen is you will gain a perk, and that is going to be the thing that you track. You're also going to get a second level feature. So for the fighter, I'm going to get a second level aspect feature, such as Inescapable Wrath, which is a thing to track. And I'm going to get a second level aspect ability, such as Phalanx Breaker, and that's going to be a thing to track. With my wizard, I'm going to again get a perk. I'm going to get a second level specialization feature, such as Disciple of Fire. And that one actually costs, or there's 2 things to track, right? So if I look at Disciple of Fire, your connection to fire allows you to protect yourself from it, even as you rip away protection of others. Fire immunity equal to 5+ your level, and fire damage you deal ignores a target's fire immunity. I'm going to call that one thing. At the start of a combat encounter, you get a number of surges equal to your victories, which you can then deal extra damage to those surges. I'm going to say that's at least 2 things to track. And then you're going to get your 5 essence ability that you get to choose. That's going to get past the disciples. So here you're going to get a new 5 essence ability at level 2. I'm going to pick one of these powers. So I might get Translated Through Flame, which is a thing to track. So it's going to be a little bit more for my Elementalist. I'm going to get 4 things to track for my Elementalist or Wizard. And for my fighter or warrior, I'm going to get 3 things. So with Draw Steel, as we level up, each level can be different, giving you different types of abilities, but it will be similar across the classes. So my third level Elementalist, my Wizard, I'm going to get for fire a conversation with fire. It lets me speak through fire with somebody. That is the thing I have to track. And then I'm going to get a level or a 7 essence ability. Other classes will have their heroic resource cost 7 ability as well. And so I get to pick one of these, and it's nice. I don't have to choose fire, but if I did want to choose fire, I would choose Wall of Fire, and that's going to be a thing that I have to get. So for my Wizard, it's going to be 2 things that I'm getting at level 3. Now, if I go to my Fury, right, I already talked about what I would get for level 2, but if I go to my level 3, here as a Berserker, I'm going to get a movable object. This is going to be something that I am going to track when force movement is applied, so I'm going to care about that. And then I'm also going to get my level 7 ferocity ability. So again, it's a 7-point heroic cost ability, and I get to choose one of these that costs 7. And so that's where I would just decide, do I want Steel Breaker to get a bunch of stamina, or You're Already Dead to reduce them to 0 stamina. A lot of neat things you can do. Face the Storm, Demon Unleash. But that is going to be that both of these classes at level 3 are getting 2 features that they get. Now, again, it can change a little bit by level. It's trying to collapse those. Instead of having 20 levels in D&D and Draw Steel, you have 10. And so you're trying to collapse down to be these kind of big, neat things that you get. So it's going to add 2 more things to the list. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, it's pretty interesting. At level 1, our D&D Fighter and Wizard are 11 and 14. For Draw Steel, that comparison is going to be 14 and 16. For Daggerheart, it's going to be 16 and 15. Versus, Shadowdarks are 4s and 6s and things like that, and 4 for Pirate Borg. So, it's somewhere between 4 and 6. And our Shadowdark Wizard does get a little more complex, like at level 3, it's a 9, but otherwise it's below 10 for Shadowdark and Pirate Borg, right? More like in the 5 to 10 range at max 10. And our Fighter will never get off of 4, right? But we can see the D&D at level 2 got 13 and 15 versus 17 and 20 for Draw Steel, 18 and 17 for Daggerheart. Our level 3 is going to be 17 and 20 for D&D 24. Our Draw Steel 19 and 22, or Daggerheart 19 and 18. So you can see that Draw Steel and Daggerheart kind of trade off of what is more complicated. They're somewhat similar, right? The just looking at the Warrior, 14, 17, 19, 16, 18, 19, really similar, right? The Wizards comparatively, 16 versus 15 at level 1, 20 versus 17, 22 versus 18. Some increase in complexity there for Draw Steel because you're getting more of these abilities, not just the one card, but you're also getting a feature every level, right? So that's what's really driving that difference. But, impressively, the Wizard for D&D at level 3 is more complex by 1 than the Daggerheart Wizard. And for levels 1 and 2, not very different, and not very different at level 1 from the Draw Steel Elementalist. So I think these are pretty comparable, right? While Draw Steel here overall is a bit more complex than Daggerheart, and generally, if we take into account the Fighter, Daggerheart is a little bit more complex than D&D. So we could say, Draw Steel the most complex, Daggerheart after that, and then D&D. The truth is, especially when you look at that Wizard, it's really close, right? It's way closer than I thought it was. I don't know what you thought before you started this video, but for me, I expected that Draw Steel and Daggerheart would be significantly more complicated. And yeah, if you have a level 2 Fighter at 13 versus either the 17 or 18 things to track, an extra 4 things, an extra 5 things to track, yeah, it is, a lot, but it's not that different, right? It's not like when we're talking about Shadowdark or Pirate Borg, Shadowdark with the 4 things, Pirate Borg with 5 things at level 2. That's completely different, right? That's another level of difference. So this was really surprising to me. So this is where I want to come back to that topic that I'd mentioned that came up on Mastering Dungeons that Sean Merwin brought up really brilliantly about the issue of latency, right? One of the reasons we talk about this complexity is because what it can mean is oh no, I'm sitting there, I'm staring at my, 2 cards. I don't know which one of these to use, right? Should I breathe fire because I'm a Dracona, or should I conjure a bunch of forest sprites that help people? And I might want to talk to people and say, hey, should I put a forest sprite, to give you +1, or do you want armor? And should I put it here or there? And we could spend a lot of time on that, right? If we wanted to, and that might be fun, or it might be too much. And a lot of this is going to be that issue of the latency, which is how delayed we are between when we want to start using a feature and when we are really done, right? When our turn starts, when our turn ends, and that payoff we get to the story, right? Because if you were to script a movie, right, or a novel and say, my fury rushes up to the orc and attacks with their axe, swinging through, hitting their side, and then right into the next one, and then catapults above the falling enemy, lands on the dais and right into the priest, right? That's a really neat, exciting concept. But what does it take for me to get there where I use, an attack that automatically cleaves into the foe next to them, and if I'm able to kill both of them, then I can use this maneuver to move an extra burst of speed and attack another target, right? And make a free strike against them. All of that, to get to that cinematic quality and that awesome narrative of what's happening, we have to get through the rules, right? The maneuver, the move action, the main action. In D&D, right? Casting that spell. If to do that really neat cinematic thing, I have to go through and look up at 2 different spells in the book that work in completely different ways, and consider which ones do which, and which one will, oh no, wait, I'm out of range. Actually, I can't do that, right? Then that latency ends up being really high. And I think all of these games have that potential. I thought that when I looked at this, I was going to see a big difference of, oh yeah, like the fighter is so simple in D&D. And what was really amazing to me and surprising to me is the subclasses, really do increase that, right? A level 1 fighter is a complexity of 11. That's not bad at all. And then 13 at level 2, not bad. But then I get another 4 points from 11 to 13 to 17 when I get to that extra bit that the subclass is adding. And there can be a lot of that latency, right? If I'm the battle master and I'm thinking about these tactical angles, if I'm in Daggerheart and I'm thinking about where to place these forest sprites, if I'm in Draw Steel and I'm thinking about how all these maneuvers tie together, or which allies are in the area of effect, and so on, those can all create latency. And so I think the truth is these games are all closer together than we think. Even though we can rank these by this particular criteria that I put together, and I think have been pretty sound in how I've gone about it, the reality is it's all kind of close. And a lot of it is going to be how you play your character. If you know how to take fast turns, then that latency will be really low. That complexity will actually be rewarding, right? It'll be neat that you can do all these things. Even if we're just talking about the D&D, battle master, right? That extra complexity that takes you to 17 will be fun. Having 2 more things for the Draw Steel isn't automatically going to cause it to be, or for Daggerheart, that doesn't make it automatically harder or worse to play a warrior. It's going to be about the benefits that you derive from it and your ability to reduce that latency down and have a blast with it. So I hope this has been as interesting for you as it has been for me. I've found this very interesting as I dug into it and compared all these different features and was surprised about how much different levels granted to classes and why, or how little, right? How Daggerheart, as you started leveling up, was not adding that much more. A lot of it's at the beginning. So it may be that across the levels, if we were to compare things, Daggerheart would actually end up simpler, which is interesting to contemplate. But there are obvious, as I showed with this Forest Sprites example, there are a number of pieces that are quite complex and require tracking a number of things. So none of these 3 games are simple per se, right? And a lot of it, again, is going to really come down to that latency, how you handle the complexity, how you make your turns be fast, and how your group does, right? How you work together to create a culture at your home group, at your table, of having fast, fun turns that make things really neat for everybody. So again, hope you enjoyed this video. If you do, please like, subscribe, and most importantly, share what I do with others. it's really hard when I work on something. It's hard to get the word out. And so when you share my video with someone else, whether it's on social media or it's reposting, any of that, if you tell friends about it, if you post about it on Reddit, if you post about it in places where I'm not on Reddit, I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on a bunch of forums. If you share the word there, that makes a big difference. And if you want to help even more, you can join our awesome Patreon supporters that make this and other shows that I make possible. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.